Hi guys, it's Kelly here, and I am back with another video for Honeybee Stamps. I am super excited because Honeybee has a new release, and in that release I have two new illustrations. This is Paradise Plumerias. I am not using this one today. We will use that one in a video tomorrow. Today we are using this one, which is Anchor of Hope, and we are going to be talking about doing some clean and layered techniques. I am also using the Beach Break A2 cover plate and stencil, and this netting A2 cover plate. You guys are going to see so much of this netting cover plate because I love it so much. So what I'm doing here to start is I'm using some masking paper. This one is by Gina K. I prefer to use one that has a backer when I have to cut it, and I cut these strips at 1 inch. For some reason, nautical to me has a lot to do with stripes, and I don't know, is that just me? I feel like you just see them a lot more. So I wanted to do kind of like a wide stripe background, as an option. So when we're talking about like clean and layered, some simple tricks and tips that you can follow is having a larger pattern in the background, something that's very easy to kind of push to the back. And a stripe is something that is very easy, and it doesn't require really anything else. You could use, old school used to use printer paper and Tombow mono multi-glue because it's repositionable when it's dry, and so you don't even need masking tape for it. And then once my stripes are in place, I did use my grid mat to help me get them straight and even. I'm going to be doing some ink blending. So the other thing that can help you with getting a card that you're happy with, and this is true of any style of card, is how you choose your colors. So because I knew that I wanted this to be kind of bright and striking, very summer feeling, I chose to choose two complementary colors that were going to give me that kind of pop, that wow factor. Complementary colors are that way because they are so contrasting. It tends to be something that you see more with like kids designs, or with like something that is perceived as being like fun or laid back, like these pop of colors. So I chose like a teal and a yellowish orange. So like a blue green and a yellowish orange, or you could do a blue and an orange. Those are complements. And then in order to pick my next color, I went with kind of like a split complement. So instead of going with a true, like a true red, you would go next to each other, because like red's opposite is green. And then so you would do the two colors next to it, which is a red violet and an orange, because I also have the green leaves. So I know these colors are going to work really well together because they're complementary of each other. Pink's complement is a yellow-green. So really it's more of a tetradic. The four corners is really, that's more, instead of a split complement, it's more of a tetradic. Well, but anyway, tetradic is just two complements that are opposite, like that are make a square on a color wheel. I hope that makes sense. Anywho, back to the actual card making. So here I am trying to leave a little bit of a lighter area in the center to create a bit of a halo, so darker on the edges, a little lighter in the center. That, when it comes to the actual like design that I did, doesn't really even matter as much because I ended up trimming them down. But a halo is a nice way to create a focal point. But so I went ahead and removed these. I have these really wide stripes. It's going to be a design that's really easy to push to the background. The other thing that I'm going to use is this Beach Break cover plate, and it is created so that there's a little bit of water in the bottom right-hand corner and the rest of it is sand. I'm actually going to use it the opposite way though, so that I could have more blue. And then this netting die, I am going to use as my smaller detail layer that's going to add a lot of interest, but not make it too busy. So if you use two small designs together, it can be a little bit more busy or feel a little bit more hectic. Whereas if you use two bigger designs together, your focal point can get a little bit lost. So doing a nice combination of the two works. If a cover plate or a die cut isn't something that you're interested in doing or isn't something that you have, you could also use a smaller print stamp for this layer. And then you would just stamp it over your background, kind of more of like a collage style to get that layered look. You can use this in white, absolutely. But I chose to use some Distress ink to add a little bit more interest to it. Since I have these 4 very bright colors that we talked about in a very confusing way, I wanted to make sure to incorporate some neutrals. So your neutrals are going to be white, black, gray, browns. Those are all going to be neutral colors. So very much to me, beach like combination is this brown and blue that feels very beachy to me, and it's a good neutral. So I am going to just randomly pick spots. I colored the whole thing with the antique linen, and now I'm just going in with a brushed corduroy, and then what's the other one I use? Gathered twigs. Just to add to that feeling of movement that this netting die has. It has a lot of movement already built into it, but adding that extra shading just makes it look more like it's kind of ebbing and flowing, and has more texture. So I'm going to set that to the side. Here is where I'm going to use the stencils. So I have used the Beach Break cover plate, and that presses a lot of really nice detail into your cardstock. But then it has the stencils that you can use on top. Like I said, I am using them differently than they are intended. However, I really love where the water is kind of breaking onto the beach, and it has this really great detail. And I definitely wanted to include that. So I am using the stencils to put in the water. And then you're going to see, it's actually a little bit of a boo-boo, but it's okay because I'll show you how I fixed it anyway. But I really, I like this one. It's a lot of solid area. So again, we have that bigger pattern that we're going to be able to push to the background, but still contributes to the interest of this clean and layered look. So once I've done the first stencil, I'm going to go ahead and lay down my second one. I am using my sticky mat to hold my stencils in place because it just makes life easier. Just makes it so much easier. So again, just using those same colors, and you've seen probably in the past I was talking over it, I'm positive of it, but I have sped up some areas. So the stenciling part I have slowed down so that way you could see kind of how it all comes together, but the rest of the water I'm going to speed up because it's just the same ink blending of the same colors that you've been watching for what, 7-8 minutes now. So that's just a tip that I have is like using a bigger pattern in the background, using a smaller pattern to kind of layer on top of that. And you don't have to use a lot of that smaller pattern. You could just use it in, like I said, collage stamps or more intricate die cuts, just so we have something that's going to add some interest and maybe a little bit of texture. So now that I have that portion done, I really love all that detail that they have, but it's not so much that it's going to compete with my focal point. I'm going to fill in the rest of what would normally be sand. And when you see other samples of like the design team using it, it's mostly going to be sand, but I wanted it to be all water. So that is why I'm doing it this way. Plus, you guys know me, you know, I like to get more bang for my buck, and any way that I can find to use a stamp or a die differently to get another look out of it, like your girl's going to do it. So, it does have, you can see embossed in there, kind of like some tide lines and some dots. That did not bother me in the slightest to just go right over top of that, because those tide lines are created by the water washing up on the shore. So like you could absolutely go in there and highlight those as white. And then they would look more like surf, like the sea foam. But because I am not trying to put a ton of detail into the background because I want it to stay in the background, that's not something that I did this time around. I do get a better blend when I do 2 layers, and so that's what you see me doing here, just going from lightest to darkest, darkest back out to my lightest. And then I spoke to my coworker, and we talked about how maybe I needed to put a little bit of brown in there so it would look like it was crashing on the beach. And it turned a little bit green. Like I put maybe a little bit too much brown, or I should have selected a cooler brown. But again, I also should have used the stencil. This is the boo-boo I was talking about. I should have put the stencil back in place before I did the brown. I didn't. So the way that I fixed that was I just went back in with my white gel pen. I can still very clearly see where those white lines are, and I'm just going to go over top of them. But don't be like me. Put your stencil back in place before you do the brown, and choose a cooler brown. Ultimately, I don't think it wasn't that big of a deal that it turned a bit green on me, because I am going to trim this down just like I'm trimming the stripes down. So here is that full background once I have fixed my boo-boo with my white gel pen. For the stamping, I wasn't sure if I wanted to do a no-line look or a black outline, so I stamped them both ways. I'm sure you could tell by the card. You could see that I used the black outline, and these ones I'll just set aside, like that. I'll just set them aside for another type of card, another day. No reason to waste them. But I did use the No Line Honeybee ink to stamp those, and then I'm going to stamp them in the intense black ink from Honeybee because I am going to be coloring these with my Copic markers. Obviously, whatever medium you love, you do you. But these ones were really fun. So originally I did the a little bit of story time, I guess we can have, right? It's a longer video. So originally I did the paradise plumerias, like on a branch and in clusters, and really loved the way that those came out. But sometimes I get ideas in my head and I'm helpless kind of not to put them out and just see how they come out. So I drew the anchor and I drew the seashell and then kind of decorated them with them, and they came out so cute, obviously cute enough that you guys can now purchase them if you would like to. But because we're going back to the color picking in one of the tips, trying to keep that cohesive color palette, I chose to do my anchor gray, as most anchors are, unless they're painted. And then I repeated that same focal point, that same neutral in the seashell. So the seashells obviously can be colored a bunch of different colors, as well as the plumerias, because they come in all different kinds of colors. That's one of the reasons why they're so great. They're bright and fun and, beachy, tropical. They automatically give that vibe, right? But so there isn't a lot of anchor scene here. There is a lot more, like leaves and florals in this one. With the other one, there's definitely more seashell visible. But coloring them, I just chose cool grays. That's like my go-to neutral. I did not want to do the warm grays. I was a little bit worried with me doing the browns that it would read as more brown because it would kind of play off of that. So I wanted to make sure that they definitely looked gray. Plus, cool grays is just my preferred because blue is my boyfriend, my favorite color, and blue is a cool color, so typically they look nice together. And we have that contrast with the warmer colors in the pink and the orange and the flowers. So went in with these cool grays. I did make sure to leave a little bit of area of highlight kind of along the edges, the top portion, and then the bottom of the anchor along each of the sides. I will go in with my white gel pen later on and further emphasize those highlights. You could definitely leave white space for them, but I find it easier with smaller areas like this to just go in with the white gel pen. Here's those yellow greens I was telling you about. I'm going to show you these leaves twice because here, these ones are a little bit smaller. And even though I do color them the same way, I think it's easier to see them on the bigger one. And so when we do the seashell, I'll show you the leaves again. So here, I'm basically just following that line up the middle with my darkest color. And then the outside lines or the veins of the leaf, I am also doing in the darkest color. Then I will move to my mid-tone and I will go right over top of that darkest color and extend it out just a little bit. For the lighter mid-tone, this YG03, I'm going to fill in the rest of the leaf outside of just a little sliver on the edge for my highlight color. And I did all of the leaves exactly the same. For the colors, I already told you how I picked those. Because I wanted that cohesiveness. I wanted that contrast that's going to make my card more interesting and bright and summery. And so I chose the oranges. This particular one is drawn kind of in a side view. And so we're following those same rules where two objects meet or where one lays on top of the other. Those are going to be the areas that we add shading. Plumerias are created kind of almost like a pinwheel. So they constantly have this lighter edge that kind of like pops over. So I definitely reserve those lighter edges, like that folded over part, for your highlight color because they're raised up higher than the rest of them. But other than that, we're just going to, add our shading kind of around in the center where they are meeting the center of the flower, where they're meeting like their branch or their stamen, their stem will be darker there. And then I wanted a really bright hot pink. This is no big shock if you watch my channel because this is one of my favorite color combinations for pink, is just this really bright pink, and it so pops with the blue and the orange and the yellow green. It's just a fun summer color combination. But I really did enjoy drawing these. I think that you guys know I very much try to make my sets more versatile. I do, like I said, I will have a video tomorrow up for myself and for the Honeybee channel using the Paradise Plumerias and another couple of sets of the release. It's a great release. I know, and I hear you guys, recently we talked about the buying from Temu and stuff, and several of you had made comments in there that you're like, it's hard to make choices, when there's so many releases. I get that. Honeybee is one of the companies that does not have a release every month. They have a release every couple of months. And so theirs do tend to be a bit on the bigger side. However, as designers, that does give us more time to play with the products that come out. So I always appreciate that. And, for you guys, if you are like, hey, I love this one, but you're the type of person who, even if you love something, like you want to wait and see how many ideas you have for it, which I think is great, then, they're going to be there. They hold on to their products for a long time. So they're a fantastic company. I love them. I love working with them. I'm very grateful and blessed to be in the position that I'm in. So finishing this one up for the seashell, I'm going to show you, like I said, the leaves again and how I colored the seashell portion. And then one of the orange flowers, I think the larger one. It's always easier to see when the things are a little bit larger. And then for the centers, they're little dots. They're just little teeny tiny dots. So just a little bit of yellow just popped right in the center. And I probably could have used one of the lighter orange colors and nobody would have noticed, quite honestly. So for the seashell, when we're talking about dimension, right, we're looking at this and there are some areas that are higher and some areas that are lower. And so in order to create that dimension, we need to add the more shading to the areas that we want to be inset and less shading to the areas that we want to be popped up. So we also do need to take into account that there is some flowers laying on top of the seashell, which will also cast a shadow. So I am starting with my darkest color, and I am putting that in the inset portion. and just kind of doing a little bit of lines at the top and a little bit of lines at the bottom. I'm not connecting them with the darkest color. Unless it's a really, like this one on the right is a really small area that's inset, that's going to be super dark. So I did connect them there. But once I move on to my next midtone, which is a C5, this is going to be where I start connecting those lines, but I'm not filling in the entirety of the inset portion. I am just going right over those lines I made with the C7 and extending it out just a little bit. I don't want to, like, it's wider at the top, so I don't want to completely fill in that C5. Also, any areas underneath the flower where it would be casting a shadow that I didn't get with the C7, I am going to add in with the C5. So just, you'll see it's darker at the bottom, and that's just because the seashell is smaller at the bottom. So it's going to, it's more gathered there, and so there's going to be darker shadows there. Once I'm out to the C3, I am not only filling in the rest of the inset portion, I'm also adding a little shading from the bottom up towards the top and underneath that flower at the top, kind of down. So that way the two areas, the two flowers that sit on top that would be casting a shadow still have darker areas. Then my C1, I will again go over my C3 and just kind of extend it out. There are still areas of the seashell, especially in the top left section, that are just white. For some added detail, obviously we know there's, seashells, there's never two alike. They're like snowflakes, right? But I did want to add something that would be a little bit more of a detail to kind of help our focal point shine, which, if you're doing a clean and simple look or a clean and layered look, you have to have a focal point that can stand on its own that's really going to grab its attention. Where you want to put your detail is in that focal point. And so what I'm doing is I'm just giving it a couple of stripes. In order to do that, any area that is lighter, that is raised, it's more of a kind of like a hump like you would make for an M. And any area that is lower, that is inset, is in the opposite direction. So more of like a U shape. And then that will give the appearance that the line is actually flowing up and down over your seashell. I did it with the C7, and then I'm just going over it with a C3, so the line is not super harsh and it blends in a bit more. Was really happy with the way that this one came out. And again, we're keeping that cohesion amongst our pair of cards, because you guys know I photograph them together and I'm all matchy-matchy like. But they both have that same kind of neutral color in the focal point. They both have the same color of leaves and the same flowers, same colors repeated in the background. So they're going to work really nicely together, especially if you wanted to do like a beachy card set to give as a gift. Those are things that continuity is something you're going to want to pay attention to. Here are the leaves again in the same way that we've already done them. These leaves are just a little bit larger, and so I think it's a little bit easier to see. You guys are probably going to be like, tomorrow when I put up the other video, you're going to be like, I don't even want to see how you color these, because I watched you color them twice before you even saw the other set. But anywho, so the same thing out to the lightest color. And then this larger flower I'm doing in the orange, but again, just leaving this in so that you can see, because it is easier to see when it's bigger. It's easier to color when it's bigger. That's just the fact of the matter. So I know that I kind of did a little, we're all over the place with chit-chatting today. I did tell you guys that I went to Nashville and to teach. There will be a story time on that coming up soon. I promise. I'm very excited to share about the travelings. But we're like, once we got home, our little jelly bean was sick. Of course, she saved it for when we got home, which honestly, I'd rather have that than having her get her grandparents, either side, sick. So she was sick, and we ended up having to go to the doctor like the next day. We got in at midnight, and the next day she was sick and we were in the doctor's office. Here are both of these next to each other just so you can see that detail. And then I'm going to go in and cut them out with their coordinating dies. This super simple to line up because the images are so large. Another little tip is if you are not sure about your neutrals or what is going to look best, this is something I learned from my girlfriend Dawn, who also has a new stamp set out in this release, and it's fantastic. So please check that out. What is it called? It's called Beach Please, I think is what it's called, which is super cute. Anyway, for the sentiments, I did black and I did craft. I did them the same way. I treated with my anti-static tool and then stamped in the Brilliant White pigment ink from Honeybee, heat embossed them with a white detail powder. But this is going to give me some options for my neutrals to see what's going to pop better with my focal point. I did end up using the black and not the craft, but the craft is now done and I can just tuck that away in my set for the next time I'm using it. Maybe I'll use it for those no line ones I stamped that I didn't use. But that way they're just there, to use. Here is where I decided my focal point was kind of floating on here and I wanted to get it a little bit of a tighter design, definitely more of the clean lines. And so what I ended up doing was I trimmed 1 inch off of each side. So instead of being 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, it was 3 1/4 by 4 1/2. Here, just something to note, you don't have to just cut off 1 inch on one side and 1 inch off other. You could be selective. Here, I wanted to keep some of this detail, so I went in and instead of cutting off 1 inch from one side, I actually cut 1/4 off of this side first so that I still maintained that really pretty beach detail and then cut off the 3/4 from the other side. Just because I wanted that detail, but I also needed that large blue area of water to push into the background. I decided to mat these with craft, again, bringing another neutral in there. It's going to play well with that netting, but also it helps those clean lines and it helps everything look nice and clean for that, look that we're going for. We want it to be layered but not messy, layered but not distressed. For the netting, I found it was easiest if I just laid it in place. I went in with my glue press and did a couple of little dots of glue and then pressed it down. Remember, I'm putting a focal point over this, so I know that my adhesive for my focal point will also help hold it in place. So I really just needed to get most of the edges nailed down, and I didn't even worry about getting all of the edges nailed down because then I have parts that are lifted that again are going to add in that texture and make this look more interesting. Once I had it on there, I just trimmed it off. Real talk, I tried to only use one net and cut it in half, but it just wasn't big enough. It just wasn't big enough for my panel. So I ended up having to do 2, which wasn't a big deal. I was actually taking longer amount of time trying to make the one that I cut work than it would have for me to just die cut the second one and color it. So one of the other things that you can do for this clean and layered look to make it more interesting without a lot of work is vary your heights. So you could glue your background, your matted background down flat and pop up your sentiment or pop up your focal point. I chose to pop them both up. Honeybee has a foam strips that are very low profile, so it's just a little bit of a lift. I used those for the background, and then for the focal point I did pop them up, but I used the smaller circle ones, which are a bit thicker, so there's a lot of interest that is added just by varying those heights. Here's those 2 pieces that I showed you. I did on the first one with the anchor, I went bottom left to top right. On this one, I went bottom right to top left, just to kind of switch up the look of them. Here's those little foam pieces I was talking about. These are thicker than the strips, so I'm going to get that added interest from having just those varying heights. And then I find it easiest when I'm putting these panels down, especially when I have such a large border, to actually stand up and look straight down at it in order to get my placement where it needs to be directly in the center. For this sentiment, I did have to add one of those little round kind of pop dot type foams to the edge and then some glue to the other side just so it would be flush. And then for the vast majority of it, outside of the details, the cards are done. I'm going to add some shimmer, of course, to the flowers, to the anchor, to the seashell. I also, like I talked about earlier, went in and added those white gel pen highlights to the anchor and to the seashell. For the seashell, I just kind of ran it down kind of the higher sections and I just let it skip where it wanted to skip. If it was a solid line, it was a solid line. If it skipped, it skipped. The two, you guys know I love their embellishments, and they came out with 4 different kinds with this release. So I ended up using the Grab Your Passport gemstones. They have like an orangey pink in there. And then for the seashell, I used the travel pearl stickers in like this blue-green color. And then that is it. That is both cards. So I hope that you enjoyed this. I hope it gives you some, tips on how to get a similar look. I hope you check out Honeybee's new release. It's a great one. Thank you guys so much for your time. I always appreciate you, and I will catch you on the next video. Bye.